Linfred of Stinchcombe. Have you ever wondered how Harry ended up so rich? Where exactly all that gold sitting in his Gringotts vault actually came from? The answer traces back nearly 1,000 years to a single eccentric wizard nobody in the films ever names. Linfred of Stinchcombe lived in the 12th century, earning the nickname the Potterer for his habit of pottering around his garden inventing potions. His muggle neighbors thought he was simply an odd but harmless old man with a talent for herbal remedies. What he was actually doing was laying the foundation for some of the most widely used potions in wizarding medicine, including Skelly Grow and Pepper Up Potion, both still prescribed at Hogwarts centuries later. That nickname eventually became the family surname, carried forward by every Potter who came after him, all the way down to Harry. The fortune he inherits and the name he carries both originate from one quietly brilliant 12th century eccentric, Nagini. For 8 films, Nagini exists purely as Voldemort's pet snake, a Horcrux container with no inner life or history of her own. Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald revealed something that completely changes how that relationship should be understood. Nagini was once a human woman, cursed with a rare condition called maledictus, that causes the afflicted to permanently transform into a beast, in her case, a snake, with the transformation becoming irreversible over time. She spent years performing in a traveling circus alongside Credence Barebone, before her curse eventually took its final permanent form. This means Voldemort's most loyal companion, the creature he turned into a Horcrux and treated with a strange mixture of affection and possessiveness, was once a fully human woman with her own thoughts, relationships, and tragic circumstances entirely unrelated to him. Their entire relationship in the original series takes on a considerably darker dimension once you understood he was keeping a former human being, who had already lost her humanity to a curse, as both a pet and a vessel for his own soul. Luna's mother. Luna Lovegood's unusual relationship with death, her openness about seeing thestrals, and her general comfort discussing loss all trace back to a tragedy that never gets mentioned even once. Luna's mother died in a magical experiment accident when Luna was only 9 years old, an event significant enough that it directly shapes how Luna approaches grief, loss, and the afterlife throughout the entire series. Unlike most characters who treat death as something to fear or avoid discussing, Luna speaks about it with a calm, almost matter-of-fact openness that makes considerably more sense once you know she lost a parent to a sudden traumatic accident as a child. The single piece of backstory recontextualizes nearly every scene involving Luna and thestrals, the invisible skeletal creatures only visible to those who have witnessed death. Luna can see them not because she is simply quirky or strange, but because she experienced profound loss at a young age, something her eccentricity quietly carries rather than explains. Aberforth Dumbledore. Aberforth spent decades blaming his own brother for their sister's death, and the films never explain why, because they never properly explain who Ariana was in the first place. When Ariana was 6, 3 Muggle boys saw her doing accidental magic and attacked her so severely that it left her permanently traumatized, unable to control her abilities afterward without spiraling into violent, uncontrollable outbursts. Their father attacked the boys in retaliation and was sent to Azkaban for life. Aberforth was the only person who could ever calm Ariana down, closer to her than Albus ever was, the two of them feeding goats together while Albus pursued ambition elsewhere. Years later, a 3-way duel between Albus Aberforth and Albus's friend Gellert Grindelwald ended with a stray curse killing Ariana, nobody ever confirming whose wand fired it. Aberforth broke Albus's nose at her funeral and barely spoke to him for decades. He kept her portrait hanging in the Hog's Head for the rest of his life, using it to smuggle students through a secret tunnel into Hogwarts during the war, his sister's memory becoming the very passage that helped defeat the people who had failed her. Ginny Weasley. If you have only watched the films, you genuinely do not know this character. Movie Ginny is quiet, shy, and exists mostly to eventually kiss Harry. Book Ginny is sharp, sarcastic, and would not have tolerated that description for 1 second. In the books, Ginny's signature spell is the Bat Boogie Hex, a genuinely nasty piece of magic her own brothers respect, and she uses it on Draco Malfoy and on classmates who get too nosy about her love life. When Fred implies she's dating around too much, she shuts him down so fast Harry notices Fred actually flinch. She dates multiple people, dumps them on her own terms, and tells Ron flatly that he has about as much romantic experience as a 12-year-old. She also reinstates Dumbledore's army with Neville and Luna while Harry is off hunting Horcruxes, recruiting students and risking expulsion to keep resistance alive at Hogwarts. The films gave us someone waiting for Harry. The books gave us someone who would have been fine without him. Peeves. Peeves was actually filmed for the first movie and then cut entirely when the child actors could not stop laughing during the scenes, which explains why a character this central to the books never appears once on screen. Peeves is not a ghost, he never died, which technically means he never lived either. According to Rowling, he simply came into existence alongside the castle itself around the year 993, generated by the sheer concentration of teenage magic and chaos packed into one building over centuries. She described him as something like dry rot, an inevitable structural problem in a building that old, rather than a spirit with any kind of personal history. Only two things in the castle's entire history could ever actually control him: the Bloody Baron and Dumbledore himself, which says a great deal about how much raw chaotic energy he actually carries. He fought at the Battle of Hogwarts against Death Eaters, helped run Umbridge out of the school through sheer relentless pranking, and has been tormenting Caretaker since the very first one Hogwarts ever employed. A poltergeist born from a school's accumulated mischief, who has now outlasted every single founder who built the place. Dobby. After Dobby's death, Harry carved the headstone himself using Draco Malfoy's old wand, the same wand Harry had taken from him at Malfoy Manor just hours earlier, choosing Draco's own wand to honor the elf Draco's family had spent years abusing. The epitaph read simply, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." Ron took off his own shoes and socks and put them on Dobby's feet before burial, a quiet callback to the socks Dobby always treasured as symbols of his freedom. What never makes it on screen at all is that Harry kept visiting that grave for years afterward, bringing a fresh pair of socks each time, leaving them at the headstone as a private, ongoing way of telling Dobby he was still remembered. A house elf who spent his entire early life being treated as disposable ended up being mourned for years by the one person who never stopped showing up: Merlin. Every wizard in Britain grows up knowing the name Merlin, but the franchise barely tells you who he actually was. Merlin attended Hogwarts and was sorted into Slytherin, a detail that house takes immense pride in while the other three conveniently ignore it. Phineas Nigellus Black confirmed that Salazar Slytherin personally taught him, making Merlin a direct student of one of the four founders rather than just a wizard who shared a house. He went on to serve in King Arthur's court, using his magic to protect a Muggle king and advocating for Muggle rights long before that was a popular position. Known as the Prince of Enchanters, he was considered one of the most skillful wizards ever to live, his mastery of charms and transfiguration unmatched for centuries. Morgana, the Dark Witch on Ron's discarded chocolate frog card, was his half-sister and notable rival, the earliest documented sibling rivalry to end up on opposite sides of legend. The Order of Merlin's green ribbon exists specifically to reflect his house colors, a quiet Slytherin nod most recipients never notice. Andromeda Tonks. Of the three Black sisters, Bellatrix became a notorious Death Eater and Narcissa married into the Malfoy's family pureblood ideology, while the third sister quietly rejected everything her family stood for and paid an extraordinary price for it. Andromeda Tonks married Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard, and was disowned by the Black family for the betrayal. Her name burned off the family tapestry the same way Sirius's eventually was. She built a life entirely separate from her sister's ideology, raising a daughter, Nymphadora, who would go on to become a skilled Auror and eventually marry Remus Lupin. The war took almost everything from her. Ted was murdered by Death Eaters. Nymphadora and Remus were both killed at the Battle of Hogwarts within minutes of each other. Andromeda, who had already sacrificed her entire family of origin for love, lost her husband, her daughter, and her son-in-law in the same conflict, and was left to raise her infant grandson, Teddy, completely alone, one of the quietest tragedies of the entire war. Bowman Wright. Every Quidditch match in the entire franchise revolves around catching a small golden ball worth 150 points. And its inventor has a confirmed backstory that almost nobody knows. Bowman Wright was a medieval wizard credited with creating the Golden Snitch as a humane replacement for the previous version of the game, which originally involved chasing a live bird called the Golden Snidget. Once the Snidget became a protected species due to its rarity and the obvious cruelty of using it as a moving target, Wright engineered a mechanical alternative that preserved the spirit of the chase without harming an endangered creature. The Snitch's wings, its erratic flight pattern, and its tendency to evade capture were all deliberately designed to recreate the experience of pursuing the original bird. One of the most recognizable objects in the wizarding world has a real inventor with a story rooted in animal protection: Regulus Black. Sirius Black spent years believing his younger brother died a coward's death as a Death Eater, when in reality Regulus secretly orchestrated one of the bravest acts of resistance against Voldemort in the entire war. Regulus initially joined the Death Eaters, drawn in by the same pure-blood ideology that consumed most of his family. At some point, he discovered the truth about Horcruxes and Voldemort's plans, and rather than continuing to serve him, Regulus made the decision to steal and destroy one of the Horcruxes himself, a locket hidden in a cave protected by deadly enchantments and an army of the dead. He brought his house elf Creature along to help, switched the real locket for a fake one, and drank the poison guarding it himself, sacrificing his life so Creature could escape and eventually destroy the real Horcrux. Creature carried that loyalty and grief for decades afterward, which directly explains his initial hostility towards Sirius and his eventual devotion to Harry. Sirius never learned the truth, dying still believing Regulus was simply a coward who got what he deserved. Morgana Le Fay. Morgana appears exactly once across 8 films. Printed on a chocolate frog card Ron tosses aside without much thought. Most viewers blinked and missed her entirely, which is a shame given how significant she actually is in wizarding history. She is remembered as one of the most dangerous dark witches of her era, connected directly to Arthurian legend in the same period as Merlin. Which raises a question nobody on screen ever asks. If Merlin and Morgana existed in the same era of wizarding history, fighting on opposite sides of the same legendary conflict, what exactly happened between them? The wizarding world chose to celebrate one and condemn the other, the same split between the hero and villain that defines so much of magical history. Morgana's inclusion on a card aimed at children suggests her story was once common knowledge in wizarding households, the kind of cautionary tale parents told before bed. Herpo the Foul. If you want to understand where Voldemort's worst ideas actually came from, you have to go back to an ancient Greek dark wizard named Herpo the Foul, a man whose fingerprints are all over the franchise's most disturbing magic despite never being named on screen. Herpo was the first wizard in recorded history to successfully create a Horcrux, splitting his soul to achieve a twisted form of immortality centuries before Voldemort was born. He's also credited with breeding the very first basilisk, the same species of serpent that later terrorized Hogwarts in the Chamber of Secrets. 2 of the most significant dark magical achievements in the entire series, the Horcrux and the basilisk, both trace back to this one ancient figure. Voldemort did not invent the darkness he became famous for. He inherited it, refined it, and multiplied it, building on a blueprint Herpo laid down thousands of years earlier. Nicolas Flamel. Nicolas Flamel is the only character in the entire franchise based on an actual historical person, and almost none of the real story makes it on screen. The genuine Flamel was a Parisian bookseller born around 1330, and his real wife, Perenelle, had already been widowed twice, bringing 2 fortunes into their marriage before he ever touched alchemy. In the wizarding version, Dumbledore actually studied alchemy under Flamel as a young man, later working alongside him as an equal partner rather than a student. A mentorship the films never mention once. Flamel owned a crystal ball for seeing into the future and a phoenix embossed book he used to magically communicate with witches and wizards across the world, including Dumbledore and a professor at Ilvermorny in America. He and Perenelle used their alchemist gold to partly fund the Beauxbatons Palace itself, with a fountain on the school grounds still named after them. 600 years old, and Beauxbatons students walk past his name daily without knowing why. Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady. 2 Hogwarts ghosts wander the castle with a connected, tragic history that links them across 1,000 years, despite both appearing on screen multiple times with zero explanation of how they relate to each other. Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of founder Rowena Ravenclaw, stole her mother's diadem out of jealousy and fled to Albania. Rowena, dying and desperate to see her daughter one final time, sent a man who had loved Helena for years to bring her home. When Helena refused to return, he killed her in a fit of rage, and then took his own life immediately after. Both became Hogwarts ghosts. Helena is the Grey Lady haunting Ravenclaw Tower. The man who killed her became the Bloody Baron, the chain-wrapped, bloodstained ghost of Slytherin House, forever marked by what he did. Centuries later, Tom Riddle charmed the Grey Lady into revealing where she had hidden her mother's diadem, eventually turning it into a Horcrux, dragging her tragedy into an entirely new century of consequences. Fleamont Potter. Harry Potter's grandfather built a fortune that directly funds Harry's entire comfortable existence at Hogwarts, and his name is never spoken once across the entire franchise. Fleamont Potter invented Sleekeazy's hair potion, a wildly successful product that the Potter family sold for a substantial profit. The same family fortune Harry later inherits that allows him to buy school supplies, owls and broomsticks without a second thought. Fleamont married Euphemia, and together they had James Potter relatively late in life. Having struggled with fertility for years beforehand, Fleamont and Euphemia both died of dragonpox shortly after James left Hogwarts, leaving him a substantial inheritance that eventually passed to Harry. Every time Harry casually assesses his Gringotts vault, that wealth has a direct name origin point most viewers will never learn. Bill Weasley. Bill Weasley spends the films looking permanently scarred and occasionally mentioned in passing, with almost none of the story behind either detail explained. As the eldest Weasley sibling, Bill worked as a curse breaker for Gringotts in Egypt, one of the most prestigious and dangerous magical career paths available, requiring exceptional skill in defensive magic and ancient curses. During the war, he was attacked by Fenrir Greyback, the same werewolf responsible for several other attacks throughout the series. Because the assault happened during a transformation rather than a full moon, Bill did not become a full werewolf himself, but it left him with permanent facial scarring and apparently some wolf-like tendencies regarding food preferences. He married Fleur Delacour shortly after, choosing her loyalty over his appearance, and the two built one of the most stable marriages in the entire extended Weasley family. A complete and compelling story reduced on screen to scars and a handful of background appearances. Charles and Doria Potter. Sirius Black's decision to treat James Potter like a brother and by extension to treat Harry like family rather than just a best friend's son has a confirmed explanation buried in family history. Charles Potter, Harry's great uncle or possibly grandfather depending on which family tree you consult, married Doria Black, connecting the Potter and Black families generations before James and Sirius ever met at Hogwarts. Doria came from the same family that produced Sirius, Bellatrix, and Narcissa, meaning the Potters and Blacks were already distantly related by the time James and Sirius became inseparable friends as teenagers. This single confirmed marriage reframed the entire Sirius and Harry relationship. Sirius was not simply attaching himself to his best friend's family out of loneliness or convenience. He was, in a very real and confirmed sense, already family, something the franchise presents purely through friendship and shared history without ever mentioning the blood ties underneath it. Percy Weasley. Percy Weasley spends most of the series as the Weasley family's most disliked member, choosing ministry loyalty over his own family, and the moment everything changed never gets properly shown. Percy's ambition led him to side with the Ministry of Magic, even as it denied Voldemort's return, and turned against Harry and Dumbledore. He went so far as to write his family a letter suggesting they distanced themselves from Harry Potter for their own safety and reputation. A betrayal that deeply hurt his parents and siblings. His return came at the Battle of Hogwarts, where he reappeared to fight alongside his family against Voldemort's forces. In one of the more memorable book moments, Percy cracked an actual joke mid-battle, something so out of character that it stunned his brother into a brief shocked silence before they all returned to fighting together. That single joke did more to repair his relationships than years of apology could have managed, and audiences who only know the films never got to see it land. Molly Weasley's backstory. When Molly Weasley screams the line that became one of the most quoted moments in the entire franchise during her duel with Bellatrix Lestrange, there is no context given for why that confrontation carries the specific weight it does. Molly had two brothers, Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, both skilled fighters in the original Order of the Phoenix during the First Wizarding War. Both were killed by Death Eaters, ambushed and overwhelmed despite reportedly taking down 5 opponents before falling. Molly lost 2 brothers to the exact kind of violence Bellatrix represented, decades before Bellatrix had ever threatened her daughter at the Battle of Hogwarts. That history transforms the duel from a dramatic mother protecting her child moment into something considerably more personal. A woman who had already lost family to this war, finally getting the chance to fight back against the kind of dark witch who had taken them from her in the first place. Xenophilius Lovegood. Here's a detail the films never touch. In 1995, Xenophilius agreed to publish Rita Skeeter's exclusive interview, giving Harry's version of Voldemort's return, taking a financial and reputational risk nobody else in the wizarding press would touch. Then the following year, once the Ministry quietly changed its public position on Voldemort, he turned around and sold that same interview to the Daily Prophet for a very good price. The man everyone treats as a harmless eccentric was also apparently a fairly sharp businessman when an opportunity presented itself. The name Xenophilius is Greek, lover of the strange, a name that fits a man who lost his wife to a magical accident, and somehow raised his daughter to be just as curious rather than afraid of it. He spent time in Azkaban after his failed attempt to trade Harry, released only when Voldemort fell, then went right back to running the Quibbler like nothing happened. Charlie Weasley. Charlie Weasley is mentioned by name throughout the films and appears on screen for what amounts to a few fleeting seconds. Despite being a fully developed character in the books with one of the more unusual careers in the entire wizarding world, Charlie works in Romania as a dragon tamer, handling some of the most dangerous magical creatures in existence on a daily basis. His expertise becomes directly relevant during Deathly Hallows, when he and several colleagues help transport dragons used to guard the highest security vaults at Gringotts, connecting his obscure career directly to one of the franchise's major set pieces without him ever receiving credit for it on screen. Considered too rough and tumble for a desk job, Charlie chose physical danger over the safe careers his siblings pursued, fitting naturally with the rest of the Weasley family's pattern of choosing meaning over comfort, even if the films mostly treat him as a name mentioned at family dinners. Fleur Delacour. Fleur Delacour spends much of the franchise being underestimated by other characters, specifically because of her beauty, and the story never fully commits to proving those characters wrong the way the books do. Fleur is part Vila on her mother's side, a heritage that grants her an enchanting allure most people around her find difficult to resist, used mainly as a visual joke rather than a meaningful character trait. What gets considerably less attention is that Shell Cottage, her home with Bill, quietly became a safe house for the Order of the Phoenix during the war, with Fleur helping hide and coordinate people on the run from inside her own kitchen. Ginny disliked her so intensely during their first summer together that she nicknamed her Phlegm behind her back, convinced the engagement was shallow. She joined the Order of the Phoenix in her own right and fought at the Battle of Hogwarts, far beyond the passive love interest the films suggest. She was later decorated by the French Ministry of Magic for her wartime bravery. Fleur consistently proves herself more capable and more loyal than the people around her initially assume, a pattern the story sets up repeatedly without ever quite letting her own the moment. Professor Cuthbert Binns. Professor Binns is the only Hogwarts teacher who is also a ghost, and the actual explanation for how that happened never appears anywhere in the films. Binns taught history of magic for decades while alive, until one evening he simply fell asleep in an armchair by the staff room fire and died quietly in his sleep. The next morning his spirit got up exactly as it always had, walked to the classroom, and resumed teaching as if nothing unusual had happened at all. He reportedly did not realize he was dead for some time afterward, and even once he understood, his routine never changed by a single detail. He remains the only Hogwarts ghost who ever interacts with the others, never joined school-wide events, and was entirely absent from the Battle of Hogwarts despite the rest of the castle's spirits fighting alongside the students. Rowling has said he was inspired by a brilliant but completely disconnected professor she once had at university, a man so devoted to teaching that dying barely interrupted his lecture schedule, and so detached from everything else that nobody, including his own students, ever noticed the difference. But what about all 10 Harry Potter eras explained? That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Watch now before Xenophilius Lovegood offers you a cup of tea.